It's Ron Rogers, and I've got a guest here today. I've got Parker Johnston, who is the guy who repacks the parachutes that I hope I'll never need on my Great Lakes. This guy right here, and used to actually jump out of airplanes a long time ago. Nothing like his experience, and I'd like you to go in some of his stories because it's pretty amazing. Why don't you just tell me about yourself, Parker?
Well, I can tell you about my military experience.
Yeah.
I got drafted out of college, and it was an interesting time because I was on a trimester system, and I didn't go one semester. I wasn't aware of the idea that the deferments went from, let's say, December to December, and so since I had gone 3 semesters in a row, I took a semester off. Well,
Oh my gosh,
unfortunately for me,
that got you.
I got a letter saying your friends and neighbors have selected you to become a member of the armed forces, and I'm still looking for those friends and neighbors.
I bet you are.
So, anyways, off I went, and I went to Waukegan. That's where you reported, and they lined us up, and I had really flat feet, and I thought, well, maybe that'll get me out. And so the doctor said, well, you've got the most pronated feet I've ever seen in my entire life. And I'm going, oh, good.
Mm-hmm.
And he went, why don't you give it a try for a year or two, and then we'll see what happens. So off I went. They put me in a line, and they went Army, 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 Marine, Army, 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 Marine, all the way down the line. Army here, Marines there. Off I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana Infantry.
Oh my gosh.
School. Got there in the middle of the night, and this was in the height of Vietnam, 1969, Tet Offensive time. So they were drafting literally everybody.
Yeah.
You know, I even had a friend, Maynard Parrish. He was a professional boxer from Louisiana. He was drafted. He had 3 or 4 kids. Drafted him. So,
oh my gosh.
it wasn't until later, like my brother's 6 years younger than me, and he had a number. They did the number system.
Yeah.
But I was in the original draft.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I started college in '68, so I'm just a slight bit younger, and that was a important time. A few years made a big difference. And I went into Air Force ROTC because I wanted to fly, and I remember my draft number when they finally came out was 325. I would have been safe. But,
yeah, you would say. My brother's was as well.
Yeah, but I wanted to go fly, so that's why I got involved. But I had friends who, they got out of high school and boom, right in.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana for infantry school. That was quite interesting. They had mosquitoes there as big as sparrows. And I remember our first encampment. They give you a shelter half. You have to team up with somebody else. He's got the other half, right? So you put the 2 halves together, and I'm sleeping in the swamp there. And it started raining. The shelter half collapsed, and the mosquitoes were all on us. And I stood by a tree all night long and waited and waited and waited. So the next day, obviously, it stopped raining, but that was welcome to the U.S. Army. But anyways, my advanced individual training, which they call AIT, was in Fort Bliss, Texas. And so I went to Fort Bliss, Texas, and I got on a unit that was air defense artillery. It's interesting that unfortunately there weren't a lot of airplanes in Vietnam to shoot down, so they used them for perimeter guard, the pieces of equipment I was on. And I was on a quad 50 machine gun, and I was a gunner on a quad 50 machine gun and a Duster tank, which is a lightweight tank. Well, it's heavy, but it's a smaller tank. It's got an open top turret with twin 40 millimeters on it. They used to have 30 calibers on, but they put M60s on the side.
Yeah.
But it was open top, and it would shoot 40 millimeter anti-aircraft.
That's a big round.
Yeah, well, it is. Well, this
about like that.
And but in Vietnam, they didn't have any airplanes to shoot down. So typically what they would do is they would put the quad 50 either on place right on the dirt or in a deuce and a half or a half track on the back of it. And you would watch the perimeter of the encampment. They'd put Constantino wire out with Claymore mines in there. Claymore mines are explosive charges that, are They're a plastic explosive electrically ignited that have BBs in them. So if there's a charge at the wire, they trip them. But we were sitting there too, so would put canister in them, which was canister. We was like a giant shotgun shell instead of a single projectile. Okay, a time projectile that puts up flak for anti-aircraft. This was a series of darts that were in there, like a giant shotgun shell. And we'd lower the guns down like this. And of course, the Quad 50 machine gun speaks for itself. The interesting note is that both of them, parts of them were made at Scott Forge here in Spring Grove, where we live.
Oh, really?
And my wife works at Scott Forge, or did. She's retired now. And they have both of them there.
Really?
One Quad 50 machine gun on a half track and a Duster tank that I drive in the 4th of July parade.
Oh, really?
I put a sign out in my office, 1969.
Yeah.
And I drive it, and that's the only 2 times that they actually have them there. So it's kind of funny, ironic.
Yeah.
Come back home and there's the same stuff I was. But anyways.
But nobody's shooting at you back here.
No.
Most of the time.
So anyways, then after that was over, the training, they assigned me to Vietnam. And I was to go to Vietnam. I was to arrive on my 21st birthday in Bien Hoa, Repo Depot in Bien Hoa, South Vietnam. And came home and did my little bit of leave, and then I left and got there. And then I actually got turned back for some reason. All the rest of the guys went on, and I got turned back. I have no reason why. And they sent me to Fort Bragg, North Carolina to do my thing that I'm going to explain. But I'm skipping one step. After the advanced individual training, they said, well, you can have a leave before you go to Vietnam, or what we can do is, if you want to become airborne, okay, we'll give you additional leave time. So I signed up for that. So I went to, it's in Georgia, I'm trying to remember the name, Fort Benning, Georgia, where the jump school is. That's, I think, the only jump school still for the U.S. Army. And so I went to Fort Benning, Georgia. And then somebody approached me and said, if you want to go to rigger school, we'll give you a little bit more time. So I went up to Fort Lee, Virginia, where I went to rigger school. They had, it was so hot back then in terms of activity that they had 24-hour day school there.
Really?
Yeah. They put us by ourselves, the airborne guys and the recon Marines, because we would always end up fighting with the other people. We called them legs, okay, the regular Army people or the regular Marine people. So we were kind of special. So they kind of quarantined us in our own little spot to keep us, our behavior a little bit. I mean, it wasn't good when we started parachute landing fall off the roof on top of guys. That was not good. So they didn't like that at all. So anyway, so then I went there. Then I got the Vietnam thing. Then I came back and I went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I had to get it. They assigned me to the Electronic Special Warfare Board there, which was a testing outfit for the U.S. Army, right on Pope Air Force Base in Fort Bragg. And I had to get a top secret clearance. And what I ended up doing was packing and testing parachutes and parachute delivery systems for the U.S. Army. And that was an interesting time because I experienced a lot of innovative things then. And it was quite interesting, actually. I don't know how I got a top secret clearance, because they actually came back, the FBI, and interviewed my parents and my friends. And I said, if they interviewed my friends and I got a top secret clearance, I'm not quite so sure about it. But anyways, I got it. So that's what I did. And I started on packing and doing some jumping and packing. And we're a Special Warfare Board, and there was the Special Forces guys across the way. We're all into that. So when I would test something initially, once it got approved, we would bring X amount of regular special forces guys over, and they would do 150, 200 jumps. We would only do enough to make it proven. So when we do a deployment, or I would jump, or somebody else would jump, or we dropped anything out of an airplane, there was always a T-28 out in front taking photos of us. And the T-28 would circle individual or the load, and that's how. And then there was a briefing, etc. There. So I remember one time, I don't know why I did it, but we were going to do some kind of testing, and I believe it was for a ballistic reserve parachute, which I'll explain later. And the T-28 out there, and I had put on a Snoopy helmet instead of a steel pot, you know, a leather flight helmet.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know why. Steel pots hurt, and they're uncomfortable, and they come down and hit you in the nose.
Yeah.
When you jump, you know, you jump before, so you know the slipstream. But if you got a big steel pot on, it's not fun.
Yeah, I just had a motorcycle helmet.
Yeah. Well, see, that's it. So, anyways, I'm at the briefing, as I recall, and our sergeant major was there for some reason that day, and they had all these generals and colonels sitting out in front, and I was way in the back, and then my sergeant major was there, and I hadn't seen him a lot. There was a couple of other enlisted officers, you know, usually there, but for some reason he was there that day. He was a wonderful guy, big, 5'6'5" black fella, Green Beret, obviously, and I was looking at his medals, and he had like the combat infantryman's badge on that had 2 stars, which meant he got shot at in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam.
Oh, wow.
And he had Silver Star 3 times.
Oh, my gosh.
He had 2 dots on his Silver Star. Yeah. And he had medals, of course, down here.
Yeah.
This man was a soldier.
Yeah. Sounds like it.
I mean, the sergeant majors are the guys that run the army.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And they tell the generals what's going on.
Yeah.
And this guy just had so much respect for him. So we're looking at the photos, and excuse my French, you might have to delete this, but it's over with, and all of a sudden I hear, Sergeant Major, what in the F is that soldier doing out of uniform? Pointing at my
Snoopy helmet.
And I'll never forget this. I said, oh boy, I'm in big trouble now. And the sergeant major said, crossed his arms and said, well, sir, with all due respect, that soldier is short, which means I don't have a lot of time left.
Right.
Okay. So we're looking for a replacement for him. Would you care to volunteer? Never forget. So anyways, now I said, now I'm really in trouble. Okay. So I remember the response, and it went like something like this. On second thought, Sergeant Major, I think his attire is quite appropriate for his position. So that was the end of that.
Oh my gosh.
But anyways, then it was just a series of different projects we had in our warfare board. It was a top secret place, and there was concertina wire around it. It was a building. We would get new airplanes, or we would get new parachutes, or any new piece of equipment, like if they've changed the tank from a Sheridan tank to something else, we would have to figure out how to drop it successfully out of an airplane. And so we would, and I'll just go with the Sheridan tank, for instance.
Okay.
You put a monocoque aluminum structure, or big pallet, so to speak, covered with aluminum on the top and the bottom, and in between were the triangular shapes, which is the strongest geometrical shape there is.
Yep.
And then there's tie downs to that. And then we would put corrugated cardboard that was about 3.5 inches thick, layers of it underneath the vehicle, so that when it landed, it would crush that, and not damage it. But it was a matter of, where do you place all this stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of a trial and error thing. There's no manual, right?
You write the manual.
So anyways, I remember the Sheridan tank episode. A couple of stories about that. It takes 10 G11A's parachutes. They're 100 feet in diameter each. It takes 10 of them.
10 of those.
And the parachute bag is probably about 4.5 feet high and about 2 feet wide.
Oh.
And there's 10 of them that we pile on top of the parachute,
What's
on
the
top
tank?
of the tank.
What's the tank weigh?
I can't remember exactly what it weighs. Sheridan tank. It depended on full fuel, no fuel, and the armaments that you put inside.
Mhm.
But I don't know what the
Yeah.
what the weight of that tank empty was. I can't recall.
Being a tank, it's going to be
It was heavy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you normally drop them with fuel and munitions? I mean, isn't that
Well, they're ready to go. You're dropping
Really?
them in
You
the
drop them
combat
and they're ready
zone,
to
and
go?
they're ready to go. I'll tell you
Oh,
a
wow.
story about that because there's no way to refuel and to arm them when you're in the combat zone.
Oh, wow.
We're dropping them right into a hot place, right? So,
Yeah.
you better be ready to go. As a matter of fact, when you drop them there, the crew jumps as well.
With it.
Yeah. Well, or after it, but they jump in the personal chutes
Yeah.
after it and
Yeah.
man the tank. That was the idea. I mean, in some instances, I suppose if they're going to resupply,
Mhm.
but usually if they resupplied, they truck those in.
Yeah.
They didn't drop them.
Right.
But anyways, so it takes 10 G11A parachutes to do that. The problem was that when you pack them, even though you do it, and we did it, our packing to the letter,
Mhm.
you had to.
Mhm.
Okay. When I went to civilian school, they took one of my parachutes and they pulled one suspension line, and it pulled completely out. And the inspector said, "That's the first time I've ever seen somebody do that."
Hmm.
Okay, usually it tangles up a little,
Oh.
but we are very to the letter.
Yeah.
Well, I pack everything completely to the letter,
Mhm.
which is not necessarily what they do in real life.
Mm.
Some of the riggers, they're interested in getting done, and it's safe, but
Yeah.
it's just not. It's hard on the parachute. The suspension lines will burn with
Yes.
friction.
Right.
The canopy will burn
Right.
with friction, so
Yeah.
you have to be careful. Anyway, so the way this operates is you load this thing in, and I have all the parachutes loaded, and they have reefing line cutters, which is a piece of a flat nylon that goes around the bottom of the parachute,
Mhm.
okay, to constrict it. Okay, and then there's an explosive charge on there. It's almost like a hand grenade. It's a reefing line cutter,
Yeah.
and it's set to all open at the same time.
Hmm.
So what happens is, and here's the procedure: you're in let's say a C-130
Mhm.
or a 141,
Mhm.
and the tank rolls out. Now, you guys, there was loadmaster for the airplanes,
Mhm.
but there's also me in there.
Yeah.
Okay, so because I'm responsible for that, he's responsible for the airplane.
Yeah.
I'm responsible for the load.
Right.
So these reefing line cutters have a flag or you have to pull a pin to arm them like a hand grenade.
Right.
Okay, so that when they get, and I'll explain this, when they get fully extended, they go off simultaneously. So, anyways, at that point in time, the bottom door to the aircraft lowers, and the Air Force guy hands the process over to me.
Mm.
Still his airplane,
Mhm.
but this is my load.
Right.
So, anyways, there's a little hangar at the end on top of this place where the load's going to go out, and it lets a pilot chute go.
Mm.
The pilot chute goes out, and it pulls an extraction chute out.
Mm.
The extraction chute starts the load. The load rolls down the rollers, goes out, and when it leaves, that aircraft goes like that. You could imagine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Anyways, the load swings underneath the extraction chute like this. The extraction chute's still pulling, and it elongates all of the parachutes.
Mm.
And then when they're finally elongated, the charges go off. So they all blossom at once.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
They have to do that because if one went prematurely, it would just blow.
Yeah.
The weight.
Oh, the weight. Yeah. Interesting.
So you have to have a simultaneous deployment of the parachutes, and I mean almost.
That's interesting. That's an aspect I hadn't thought about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the money, it has to. Single parachute is no problem. We dropped a lot of little loads.
Yeah.
I actually used cotton parachutes, disposable, not nylon.
Yeah. Oh.
But anyways, yeah, with multiple parachutes, it's an issue. with heavy weight, like road graders. We dropped them out. We
Yeah.
dropped out deuce and a halves. We dropped out tanks.
Mm.
You know, I didn't get a chance to really work on the C5A. It just arrived when I was going to leave, but I will tell you that story in a minute. But anyways, that's how. So, anyways, I'm one day at the drop zone. A lot of times I was the drop zone NCO, which meant I was there because it's our parachutes. And if we're going to do a demonstration, I make sure that we get them all put away, packed up, and sent back to our packing unit. Right. So we had a bunch of Vietnamese generals and colonels and our generals and colonels from Bragg there, and they're going to do the 82nd, I think, is going to do a demonstration of airborne delivery systems. Well, they dropped a road grader and one of the wheels came off in flight. I don't know how that happened, but that was kind of a disaster. But the biggest disaster was somebody forgot to pull pins on the reefing line cutters for the tank.
Yeah.
The idea was they were going to drop the tank, okay, in front of us, and then it was fully loaded, okay, and drop it, and then the guys were going to get on it, and they were going to go there and shoot, to show how this whole thing worked.
Yeah.
Well, without those safety pins going off, is complete total malfunction.
Yeah.
They just screamed in. Well, the tank hit. Actually, it hit close to a shed. And when somebody said, anybody in the shed, watch out, there's about 5 guys came out of the shed. I think they were hiding from their boss or what.
Oh, no.
Yeah, but anyways. So it hit the ground, buried about 4 feet in the sand.
Yeah.
And started smoking. Immediately evacuated everybody because it was live ammo.
Right, yeah.
And they left it there for several days before it calmed down, but the heads rolled on that one. It's pretty embarrassing.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when you're doing that. Jump into a small lake, and I was out there in a rowboat or a John boat with a motor and some flares, and 2 C-130s come. Now, in a C-130, you know, it's an ideal airplane because it's a lot slower than a 141.
Right.
So for most of our applications, the C-130 was really good. But when you're jumping into a small lake, okay, unless you're doing halo, okay,
right,
which is more pinpoint accurate halo, which I'll explain in a minute. You don't have a full stick of people in the aircraft.
Okay.
Because if you did, by the time you got them all out as like this, by the time you got them all out, you'd be 20 miles over there.
Yeah.
So the LZ has to be big.
Yeah.
Okay. To do that, even though you're jumping out of both doors or the back. Sometimes we run right out the back.
Yeah. What was the difference between the doors or the back?
No, nothing. Just, you know, they just didn't lower the back down unless we dropped the load. In the 141, in any of the jets, you can't jump out of the back.
Right. You go out the side.
You have to go out the side. You have deflector doors.
Right.
So I'll tell you a story about that too. But anyway, so they were going to jump, and so I'm out there, and the 130, as I recall, this is my best record. They dropped some streamers. I don't know what that was. Probably they're checking the wind or something.
Yeah.
And I lit some flares in the front. Now you can see the smoke, right? They can see the smoke. So they came around again, and they kind of crabbed, you know, to get in position to get these guys. And I don't know if the lake was 10 acres, but it might have been, which is pretty big, actually.
Yeah.
And they weren't jumping from about 500 feet, I think. Oh. And they had semi-steerable chutes. Just the beginning of steerable parachutes. Back then.
Most of the times you didn't jump steerable chutes.
No, they were T10s.
Yeah, and we would modify those for sport.
Well, that's what our unit did. Since we had sewing people there and all sorts, we would modify them into double T's and split L's and whatever you call. We'd sew suspension in the leading edges. We'd sew toggle lines so you could tip the canopy.
Yeah,
and so it became what was called the Paracommander back then.
Oh.
Because when I was stationed at Bragg, the Golden Knights were upstairs, I was downstairs.
Oh.
Okay, so we did a lot of work with them, but they used modified T10s, or they used what was called later a Paracommander.
Well, that was the last parachute I jumped, because that was the most advanced at the time.
Yeah,
it had all the holes.
It was a round chute. The idea was that our unit tested different ones. We tested pair of wings and parafoils.
Yeah, we had a guy who jumped a parafoil, and that was he lost one of the lines, and he ends up doing one of these things.
Well, ours were all the pair of wings were different, but the parafoils are used today.
Yeah,
it's an
the square chute.
It's actually you know,
it's a wing. It's a wing,
and it's very steerable, and you can actually fly with it.
Yeah,
and that's why when we did Halo, we tested Halo, high altitude, low opening.
Right.
So you have an oxygen bottle on your reserve, and you jump. And I could land probably Special Forces guys. We could land right in a small parking lot. Everybody at night. Okay, and you couldn't even hear them.
Yeah, I watched those guys. I mean, they're so steerable compared. I mean, the Para Commander was a big deal when I was jumping it, and the square chutes were just.
So back then, for combat, we didn't need anything really steerable. You start out at 500 feet,
right,
and 200 sticks. You go like this. But anyways, back to the story. So there was only I think 10 guys in each, and there were recon Marines. Recon Marines are their version of the Special Forces guys.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and they have a different parachute wing. Then it's a golden parachute wing.
Oh.
But we're kind of brothers because the airborne guys are all together.
Right.
But we still don't like each other. They're still jarheads, right? I don't care what kind of what kind of wings you put on them. They're still jarheads. And I'm sure they have some bad things. Dogs, they call it, or whatever.
Oh, yeah, everybody.
But anyways, so here they come out, and it's dusk. Not one of them hit the lake.
Really?
The wind was blowing. Not one of them hit the lake. They're all in the trees all over. I spent the rest of the night trying to get them out of the trees.
Okay.
I over there yelling at them, hit your QRP, quick release button.
Yeah.
Hit that. You turn it and hit it.
Yeah.
Okay, and that releases. Okay, you hang there. But you first pull your reserve, snake it through the trees, and then slide down your reserve, right?
Oh. They didn't have the penetrator, the lines?
No, they had, no. Well, you're right in that oak tree. There's nothing that's good. You might be able to cut some brush or something. No.
Well, I mean, we had, when I flew with a reserve unit, we had some trees, so we had like 300 feet of line that you would hook up and you'd let down. It was in the.
Yeah, I don't think we had that back then because this was my only episode with that. This was a few years before. Maybe they learned from that episode that they needed that.
Well, I thought in Vietnam when they had some of the real high trees.
Well, they might have.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
But this is that situation.
Yeah.
So they were in this. So the reserve works pretty well. You just pop the reserve. Unfortunately, it's not the best thing for the reserve parachute or parachute. So we got him out of there, and then the captain came up to me and said, "I said to him, sir, with all due respect, why don't you guys stick to climbing hills and doing jump and stuff? Yeah, I don't feel like that very much." But anyway, so that was the episode. So, anyways, my unit, and we had I don't know how many riggers we had, but we probably had 10, and then we had a fabrication room. Then we had a room that did, like I told you, the cardboard and all of that. And figured out how to strap the loads and this and that. And so then came the LAPES program, which is
down there. Yeah, why don't you pull it up and go to the camera there?
The actual combat photo that I have. That was this was Case Honor. One of the things, it was surrounded by the enemy at the time. And this was one of the first times it was ever used. That was the system. It's called LAPES. There's low altitude parachute extraction system. So that's what that is. Pretty brave pilot to throw it out.
Yeah.
Low. There's in a combat zone, the enemy was all surrounding these guys. They were out of ammo and out of food, so they needed to do this. They couldn't risk doing a regular drop because if it drifted off, they had no way of getting it. So this was the answer, and this is what I ordered.
Now, in this case, the extraction chute is all you got. It pulls out and it comes out.
Slams, skids on the ground.
Yeah, so you're what, 30 feet, 20 feet?
Yeah.
I mean, you're as low as you can be.
As low as you can be.
Yeah.
Pretty brave character to do that.
Yeah.
In a hot zone.
Yeah.
Put all the small arms fire there.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah. I almost got into a C-130 unit. I mean, they had an amazing mission. All of this stuff.
Well, it's one of the best airplanes the Air Force has ever had.
Yeah.
I mean, in talks of the mission, it can do many different missions.
Mhm.
Paratroopers and
Yeah.
gear and equipment and
Supply.
and stuff. Well, anyway, so this is what we tested. That's the extraction chute, and it's funny because we had to test the different loads because it's a different thing than hitting flat down. Now you're skidding something on the surface,
Yeah.
so the tendency for motion to stay in motion.
Right.
Okay.
Newton.
Yeah,
Yep.
is there. So that load would probably go way off the pallet, shoot off into the
Yeah.
boondock. So you had to configure it so that it ended in intact safely. So we tested that, but I'm pretty proud of that. Actually saved all these guys, this exact mission.
Really?
Yeah.
And I notice he's got his flaps down.
Yeah.
So he's being shot at, and he's flying slow.
And he's flying slow. We had to.
Yeah.
Because you don't want this. It's a big platform. Yeah. You don't want it flipping over.
Yeah. 1 FMV squared. The faster you're going, the energy goes way up.
Yeah. So he's brave dude.
And that the downwash from the flaps didn't hurt you.
We tested it all different ways.
Oh yeah.
You just went too fast.
Yeah.
You had to get it slow.
Yeah.
You know, like your pilots in the audience, they know what a soft field landing is.
Right? Yeah.
So, you know, you almost had to be in that configuration, right? So, very cool. And that's an actual. I think that's 101st Airborne on the ground there. And they were surrounded and trapped, out of food and out of ammo. Wow. And this saved them. And that's an actual combat photo.
Yeah.
From that day. Cool. So that's one of
them. That's taken by somebody who
had a camera.
I mean, and is he in the air?
No, he was one of these guys.
He's on the ground. He's on the ground. Yes, I see that.
Took it probably with we didn't have fancy cameras back then, right? So you could tell the quality, the photo quality is the best.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that going right by the guy dropping.
Right. Well, him too.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
And I think he has something there. Either he had lowered his camera or something. See how his arms are like this?
Yeah.
But anyway, so
that's amazing.
So we did that at low altitude. We did the halo, high altitude, low opening, which is interesting. At nighttime, you have lights on the back so you can see the guy down below you.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, because collision's a big deal.
Yeah. I wasn't. You know, we had our programs, different programs. Some guys were doing this, some guys were doing that. We were packing the parachutes for it. But mine basically was a lot of these loads. So we dropped stuff out of everything the Air Force had. From beavers and otters to 123s.
Really?
Yeah.
C7s, probably?
C7.
Caribou?
Yeah. I actually got the privilege to be in the last flying one this year at Oshkosh.
Oh, really?
There's only one left. And I was telling the guy how we did it. They actually put JADO on. Yeah, so
really?
You had to get them out.
Yeah.
Yeah. It had kind of a crude JADO. They probably don't know what JADO is. That's jet assisted takeoff. So
little rockets.
Pods on there. And they use a lot of them in C-130s. But on short fields, you need that.
Yeah.
But the Caribou was a pretty good airplane, albeit real small.
Yeah. There was a reserve, Pittsburgh Reserve unit had them. And I stopped by there when I was still in the reserves. And I talked to one of the pilots, and he said, you could still smell the Agent Orange in the cockpit. Oh, yeah. And I went in there, and you could smell it. I mean, I got caught. I'm glad I'm not flying this thing.
We did 123s, too.
Yeah.
Okay, which is like this, but smaller, a little twin engine version.
Yeah.
123s. I jumped out of C-119s.
Oh, really?
Yeah. At Fort Benning, that's what they had. The reserve came.
The flying boxcar.
Yeah, and all of us. And anyway, so when I was doing my initial jump training, I'm sitting in a C-119 flying boxcar. And we're taking off, and I'm watching some nuts and bolts dance across the floor. And I said, I can't wait to get out of this. Which they accommodated me.
Yeah.
But it was a reserve aircraft then. So that was the weekend warriors come down and do a bunch of us paratroopers.
Did you use the doors? Because they couldn't really open up because they opened up the back with a clamshell.
They had a clamshell, yeah.
Really?
We used the doors.
Okay, yeah.
We didn't use the clamshell.
Yeah.
I used to jump out of this. If we dropped the load once in a while, when I was up there, I would jump. If I needed to get current or something, then I would jump out after the load. And the load masters would always say, Parker, why in the hell are you jumping out of a perfectly good airplane?
Yep.
And I would say to them, well, first of all, have you landed yet? So how do you know it's a perfectly good airplane?
That's right.
And a second case scenario, I'll be on my second beer at the NCO club by the time you park this thing.
I used to tell people I was scared of landings.
There you go.
I could do takeoffs, but landings scared me, so I jumped out.
Yeah. So the guy that used to take pictures of us
Uh-huh.
when we did the deployment or whatever, a few times I would do the jumps, individual jumps. We tested the ballistic reserve parachute. And that was interesting because the parachute on a T-10 is in front of you.
Right. That's how I jumped with the old chute.
Right.
Yeah.
But the problem with that was that in a combat jump like this, as you can see what happens here.
Yeah.
These guys will drift underneath and you'll get your air stolen.
Yeah.
Well, else by stolen, I mean, goes down like this, and this guy's chute will start to collapse.
Yeah.
So what you're supposed to do is land on top of his parachute,
Right.
slide down and grab his suspension lines and go down with him.
Mm.
Problem is, we're jumping combat jumps at 500 feet.
Yeah.
By the time you do all of this stuff, you're hitting the ground.
You're wearing gloves, right?
We didn't wear gloves.
Really? I mean, you could burn your hands on those lines.
Well, they didn't. Yeah, but that was the abnormal.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not doing that every day.
Yeah. I mean, but even
the only way you had to steer a T-10 is there were risers there about 1.5 inches wide,
right?
4 of them. You'd pull the front to spill air in the back.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you would land backwards or sideways.
Right.
And that's why we used a parachute lander,
Yep.
PLF. Because nowadays you land very easily and nicely most of the time because you can steer into the wind and stall this thing and you just sit there. You just can't do that on a combat jump. So the idea is to get you down fast so that nobody's shooting at you.
When I went to the Air Force, they took us up under the chutes, and then we had to come down. So we got that kind of training. And the guy says, the guy runs says, "We got any skydivers in here?" And I go, "Well, me." And he says, "No stand-up landings."
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
okay.
They didn't want you to stand up.
So I ended up landing right in front of it, and I was so used to stand-up landings. Even under that chute, which wasn't a great chute, I did a stand-up landing, and I looked at him. I put my feet together and I did a PLF, and then he just starts laughing.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah,
well, it's kind of Pavlovian, right?
Yeah,
you're
just so used to it. Yeah,
but so the PLFs and other sides, forget kind of what I was talking about, but
the combat jumps and low altitude and
low altitude. So, anyways, we're talking about the ballistic reserve.
Oh, ballistic reserve, yeah.
So the idea was when you had a malfunction, one of two things happened. One, it would go up inside your canopy, your existing one, and wrap around your suspension, causing you a real malfunction.
Yeah.
Okay. And the next one was it would drop completely down because the canopy was not complete malfunction, it was partial malfunction,
like a Mae West,
stealing your air, like a Mae West, which is suspension lines that go over the top, and that's because you'd flip over when you deploy. You can also see some of these guys are still twisted up.
Yeah.
Okay. And some of these guys are okay, but some guys are twisted, and that's because their body, they had an extremity out and they spun.
When I started free fall, I'd get into twists and I'd run my lines up and I'd have to untwist.
Oh yeah, you have to untwist. So, anyways, the idea was okay. So, and was the procedure for that. You'd pull your ripcord in the front. Okay, the handle is right here. You pull that, and then you would hold your hand over it like that and grab the edge of it.
Right.
Lower it down and then shake it to get some wind.
Yeah.
Well, you're at 500 feet.
Yeah.
No. So, I mean, when you're doing a practice jump and you're a couple thousand feet, that's all well good, but you're not doing any of that. So they tried to devise a rocket-assisted reserve parachute.
Okay.
We were working that.
Yeah.
Which, when you deployed this, there was a short delay to get your hand out of the way, but it would blow out a little pilot chute, and your reserve chute out beyond the 28-foot diameter of a T-10. Okay, so 14 feet. Had to blow it out, so you got it on the side. Worked like a charm. The only problem with it was, and why they didn't use it when I was there, they might now, was that if you're sitting in a C-130, and you have a premature,
Yeah.
firing. It's
Yes.
going to go through every one of your buddies,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
A little dangerous.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's the reason.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
That's why I always guarded my chute setting in the door of the
Mhm.
jump plane, because boy, if you pop that, you were going through the
You're
side
going
of the
through,
airplane.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember packing some parachutes for F4 guys would come to our base once in a while, and they'd taxi up to, they needed a repack or something. Normally the Air
For the
Force
drag
did that.
chute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the extraction chute. I think they had a handle, as I recall, that came over
Oh yeah.
like this.
But be like, yeah, you had a couple of them.
Or
You had the
two.
face curtain.
That's what I
Right.
remember in the face curtain,
Yeah.
and that would initiate the canopy disemployment,
Mhm.
and then the second after you get fired. I mean, it was in a second.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they had guys that went through the canopy.
Right.
Okay, that's not a good thing.
No.
So I remember doing that. Uh, but anyways, so that idea they didn't like too much, and there were a lot of others that we tested, and then I remember the day the C5A came in. They had two of them,
Mhm.
the first two, C5A number 1 and number 2, and we were going to test C5A number 1. It had done its Arctic testing. That was the first thing they did.
Mhm.
Was their Arctic testing, and then it was coming to us to see about the practicality of what we could put in it and take out and jump and whatever with it. Okay, so we're all standing outside of our unit, runways right there, watching it come in,
Mhm.
and I'm amazed how big it is. You know what I mean? We dealt with 141s and stuff,
Yeah, it's huge.
Starlifters, but it's huge. I mean, it looked like it's just hanging there coming in. It landed and the nose wheel collapsed,
Oh no.
and it slid to the end of the runway. Now we have no equipment to even move it.
Yeah. It's huge.
It stayed there for days
Oh yeah.
at the end of the
Yeah.
runway
Yeah.
before they could figure this out.
Yeah.
So then they figured it out and they actually brought in another C5A run number 2 with the
Yeah.
equipment to get this
To
thing
get this one out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that delayed for about a week or so my training. Now I'm getting pretty short. I'm getting to the end of my thing. And so anyways, we got a chance to do some testing. We have dummies and open up the hydraulic doors. For the life of me, I have no idea why they would think that a C5A would be good to drop paratroopers on.
Mhm.
First of all, with 200 guys there, you'd be from here to Milwaukee
Mhm.
before you got them all out of the airplane. One.
Yeah.
Two, why would you expose a gigantic airplane like that to all ground fire, etc.? It's not very expendable.
Yeah.
Right.
And then it was supposed to be able to go into unimproved fields,
Yeah,
short fields. And, yeah.
Well, I had the whole demo. It could squat. It had the ability to squat
Right.
and move like this. You load in the front, it would go out the rear.
Mhm.
The nose came up. I mean, innovatively, it was an interesting airplane.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And huge.
Yeah.
You could put 7 Greyhound buses inside.
Mm.
And so when I got in there, it was monstrous. So we tried the dummies, and they'd bang around, put down the fuselage. But you can't jump out of a back jet because you go the vortices like this, so you'll go right up into the tail, even though the tail is a 10-story building.
Yeah.
You just go
Right up into it.
The 141, you can't jump up. You can drop stuff out, but you can't. At least maybe they've developed something new. So I was there, remember, in 1969, 70.
Right.
So lots of things have changed.
Exactly.
So they finally got smart about the C5A, and they use it as a cargo plane, basically.
Yeah.
And that's what it's. But they're trying to sell this airplane, mind you.
Exactly.
Okay, so they're trying to sell it as a multi-purpose. The best multi-purpose plane ever built was the C-130.
Yeah.
Still is today.
Yeah.
They've changed the engines about 10 different times.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they're up to H models, or they're past that, I think. Yeah. They've done so many.
So it's almost like a B-52, right?
Oh god.
There's nothing new in a B-52 anymore, except maybe the fuselage, right?
Yeah.
They've changed the wings, they've changed the engines, they've changed everything on it, and it's still flying.
I did a thing on the radar. I made an improvement to the radar that more than doubled its accuracy back in the early '80s, and I found out that radar, 40 years later, is still the radar on the airplane. They changed processing and stuff, but the basic radar, they're just finally now changing out. And I go, you got to be kidding!
Wow. Yeah, interesting. So I tested that, and then it was time to leave. So I left, and I got approached by the CIA. A friend of mine, Green Beret guy, was a major, and he asked me if I was interested in it because my MOS was very high.
Yeah.
Okay. And they needed people in Cambodia and Laos to drop things out of it.
And MOS is
military occupation.
okay.
So I had two MOSs, air defense artillery, and then this rigger, parachute rigger. But because of what I've done, and I dropped stuff out of I didn't, our unit, out of everything known.
Yeah.
I mean, beavers, otters, like I told you, all the way up. It was very valuable. I mean, they gave me a very interesting re-enlistment bonus if I wanted to sign up. And then this thing came up. But I was making like only $75 every 2 weeks with $10 hazardous duty pay.
Hey,
What was a deal?
yeah, get a burger.
They offered me $2,000 a week, no taxes, to do that. But if I got nailed,
yeah,
nobody's going to help.
That's right. We don't know who you are.
So I said, let me think about it. Anyways, they said, well, a Greek shipping guy is going to call you and you're going to go to Seattle. And so we go to Seattle, then the ship goes over to where we're, because they couldn't fly over there for, send.
Yeah.
My God, the guy called me. And I turned him down. I was going to do that, but I've had second thoughts on thank you, Captain.
Yeah.
He wanted me to be a crew of his ship. He had a merchant ship out of Seattle going to the Far East.
Yeah.
That's how they were getting the guys over there.
Ah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I turned that down. Thank goodness. I mean, they had plenty of time to get me. I figured so.
Yeah.
Push your luck.
Right.
But interestingly enough, and how I got in aviation was the pilot of the T-28 that took pictures of us in the deployment became my flight instructor.
Really?
Yeah, at Bragg. So I learned to fly.
What'd you learn in?
I think they had 172s there. And we learned to fly. So I'll just tell this last of the story, but he was quite the character. Wasn't very talkative, as I recall, which I am. But I get in the airplane, and he does some taxiing with me. Now, this is my initial flight, and we get to understand what the rudder pedals do, on the ground, but he's saying too, and the yoke and whatever. So, anyways, we get on the runway and off we go. So I'm on it, and he's on it too, but he's letting me do it. And I did a pretty good job. I got down the runway, and I pulled the yoke back and went in the air. So I turned to Major Pinson, and I said, Major, sir, that was pretty easy. Nothing. Not a response at all. So I'm trying to make some conversation.
Yeah.
And so he goes, okay, pull back a little bit, keep it right there. So I kept it right there. And then he told me how to use the rudder to keep the airplane's track straight. And so we're going off. And so I turned to him again. I said, Major Pinson, sir, you don't mind me asking, I don't know, but what's easier, taking off or landing?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget this. He turns to me and he goes, well, son, I tell you this, landing is much easier than taking off. I said, sir, with all due respect, I find that hard to believe.
Yeah.
And he turns to me again and goes, son, we never left one up there yet. You will land. I'll never forget that. That was my introductory flight in flying, and I went on to get my commercial instrument, all the stuff. So I got my instrument at ATE down in Midway Airport.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyways, I enjoyed that for years and years and years, and flew Jeremy's little light sport airplane, amphibious airplane up to Alaska and back. That was quite an adventure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that's
7,500 miles through the mountains.
Yeah.
What an adventure that was.
Yeah. I flew it in a 727, but it's totally different.
Yeah, a little different.
Still a little different.
Yeah, I landed on the Alaskan highway a couple of times and taxied over and had lunch.
Really?
Yeah, just pull over right to a gas station.
Yeah.
Had lunch. And yeah, it was, and I have a little cub, which I'm refinishing now. I've got the fuselage is almost ready to put the fabric on. So the wings are done, the engine's done. So. But I've enjoyed that, and I worked with the Aerostars aerobatic team for a while, for a few years. That was a lot of fun. The guys are great guys.
Oh yeah,
They're partners in this hangar here, so yeah, that was really fun. Got to meet all the aviation people in the business.
Yeah,
Dave Dacey and wing walkers, and
I mean they're just up the road.
Yeah, just up the road.
I mean, yeah, I had my airplane hangared there for a while.
Yeah,
he just got Hall of Fame for 40 years of Airshow.
Yeah,
I mean, cool guy. And I go down to the antique fly-in in Blakesburg, Iowa, and the Daceys come down there.
Yeah, Susan, Dave.
Yeah, Susan, Dave. They're great people.
Susan's still flying.
Yeah, yeah, she's still doing air shows.
Yeah, I think isn't she still flying in the industry?
Yeah, she flies for the airlines. Yeah,
but it's a small group of guys, and Tucker and all the guys that all the aerobatic. I know them all. So, it was kind of fun for a while, and but for some reason, when I watched even our guys now, we had the Yak 52s, TWs, which is the Yak 52.
You had those for a while.
That's nose gear, but we had the TWs, which was tail wheel, and that was kind of interesting. And then we went to the extra 300s, which, to be honest with you, for me, being associated with the business, didn't do a dang thing for me. I like the old airplanes with the radio engines, and smoke, and
the Stearmans.
Give me the or guys like Aeroshell.
Yeah, they put on the Stearman show. Yeah,
with all the smoke and the noise and the lights and this and that. And
well, that's a real airplane. The Stearmans are the real airplane.
And then Dave had the wing walker, who I became real good friends with, Tony.
Yeah,
and Kardashian or something like that.
Wing walking is something I've never been. I guess there's a new Tom Cruise movie, and I don't know much about it, but he's out on the wing of it looks like a Stearman, and I go, okay. And supposedly he does his own stunts, so I got to.
Tony was an interesting guy. He would actually, like a lot of them, start out and they strap themselves to the post. There's a post to those people that don't know that's there, and they go up and they strap themselves to it. But regardless of that fact, it's pretty scary.
It's still operation. Yeah.
Right? Tony would actually climb out of the front seat and climb up on top of the wing while in flight. Yeah. And then hook himself up.
That's not something I'm ever going to do.
Yeah. So I just often said to him, I know you've heard this a million times, but I jump out of airplanes and you think I'm crazy?
Yeah, exactly.
Come on, Tony. You gotta be kidding me.
How many jumps you got?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't jump as much as I was kind of more parachute packing than jumping. Okay. Because our idea wasn't to jump a lot. We just would jump if it was like the ballistic reserve parachute. We would test it a few times, and then we would give all the bulk of the testing to a regular special forces unit, and they would jump hundreds of times.
Yeah, well, you did the initial testing.
The initial testing,
that's significant. Yeah, that's significant.
To make sure it worked, and then we did a lot, and I mean a lot of equipment dropping. Everything from pallets of ammunition to all sorts of things. They even tested my unit. I wasn't part of the program when they were testing it. A steerable parachute that was radio controlled. And it was in the shape, I remember, of a delta wing. And the idea was to drop a piece of ordnance or a load way over there and not exposing the aircraft to ground fire. And then the person on the LZ would steer it, electronically, by little servo motors pulling certain steerable parts of it, and would steer it into the LZ. They were working. So our unit did a lot of cool stuff like that.
I started a skydiving club because the other ones folded. The Iowa Parachute Team, we called it, in Iowa City, and I got 113 jumps, which is total, small.
Yeah.
But because I ended up going to the Air Force right away, almost. But we for the students, we'd have a little walkie-talkie on the chute, And then the instructor on the ground would give them turns, stuff like that. And I said, it's just like having a remote control parachute, isn't it?
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I'll tell you another story here. So here at Galt Airport, we had a shack over there because we're EAA
932.
932.
Yeah.
So there was a shack over here that was a 932 building. They've since demolished it.
Oh, really?
It was falling apart. Yeah, it was where that little equipment shack is right now.
Okay.
It was between the garage and the pergola that's there.
Okay.
Anyways, so they were tearing it down, and somebody found a T10 reserve in there.
Really?
Yeah. So of course, who do they bring it to?
Mm-hmm.
Me. So Brian, the head mechanic down here, he owns. He's the master mechanic. Brings it over to me, and Parker, what the heck? We know it's a parachute, but what is it? And I said, well, it's a T10 reserve. And he said, well, do you think it's any good? And I said, well, no, it looks like an older one. And we only used them for a couple of years, and then we got rid of them. The reason for that was they had different manufacturers of parachutes back then. And to expedite some of the process and the availability of material made those people use this chemicals to adjust the porosity of the parachutes. Okay. So you need to have yourself coming down at 27 feet per minute or whatever it was per second.
Yeah.
Okay. If you go down too fast, you're breaking legs.
Right.
So that's a casualty. As far as they're concerned, you're dead because you're out of the picture, right? That's why the gooks used to like you blow your hand off. You know, they don't need to kill you. They just need to send you home, right?
And then somebody had to take care of you.
Yeah.
Took two people out at least.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was so. I said no. This stuff we only kept for 2 years, and then we got rid of it. And again, the porosity thing, we could still test them to this day, but I don't usually pack a parachute that's over 20 years old.
Yeah.
And they don't use that process anymore. There's plenty of material that's without that. But they did that because they needed to expedite production of a lot of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, so he said, "Did you ever pack one of these?" And I said, "Are you kidding?" I packed thousands of these things. Thousands. And I facetiously said I probably packed this one. Take out the booklet, open it up, and there's my name. I was the last one to pack it in 1970.
Really?
Parker Johnston.
Oh my gosh.
And they were in shock. So was I.
Yeah.
I mean, I said, how did it get here? How did it get from Fort Bragg, North Carolina to here and let me find it?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Well, we were jumping as our shoots. I got my shoot for $50 way back in the 70s, and some guy wanted to dye it red. Ended up being pink, so I got kind of a good deal because jumping a pink shoot.
It has nothing to do with your gender.
Exactly. But I mean, lines would break, so I'd take my needle and thread and sew it together. I'd get a rip in the one of the panels, so I still have the ripstop tape out in my hanger. I put ripstop tape over it. We didn't know anything about lifetime or these things wore out. We just kept jumping them till they fell apart. Finally, I gave it to a grade school teacher who wanted it for her class to play with.
Well, there weren't a lot of companies back there in the 60s. I mean, it was a new sport that was starting.
Oh, yeah.
All you had was military, surplus stuff to work on.
That's what
we did it for guys would bring me they'd buy one military surplus at our unit, and they'd say, "Can you fix it?" I said, "Yeah, I got a couple guys in the back." And they'd take out the panels and the gores, and they'd sew suspension,
the TU or the
inverted the T's or double L's.
Double L's.
Yeah, and we'd do that, and then put the toggle lines on it, so it went up to
you could steer it.
You could steer it a little bit, and that was the first parachutes for skydiving.
Yeah, that's basically. In fact, I had an airplane altimeter, which kind of got beaten the hell up.
I still have some.
Yeah, that's what I used on my reserve to know what altitude I was at before I got the small one I could put on my wrist.
And now we've got all sorts of stuff. I don't do any of those anymore. We just do a partner. We do Warbird and aerobatic airplanes.
Yeah,
that's all I do. I'm not interested because the skydiving thing has changed so much, and you have to really keep up with the technology. And I do this part time now. Okay, so I'm not interested in the newest automatic opening devices and all this stuff that's in there, and they're set by altimeters that are in there, and it's just. And then we have tandem parachutes, which I've never done.
Right.
So I just stay away from that. There are plenty of riggers around here that do that.
Really?
Yeah. Well, there's not plenty of riggers, but there are. Every jump place, there's a couple locals.
Yeah, that Skydive Chicago or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I went in there and I saw something, and they had these ridiculously small chutes.
Yeah.
And they're the square chutes. And I said, I used to jump a Paracommander, and this young girl said, "What's that?" I had to show her my phone. Oh, Paracommander.
I know. Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah, they're pretty slim, and even your chutes in your airplane have got significant. It went from ones that were so bulky in the Army that most of them were seats.
Yeah, seat packs.
Yeah, because you couldn't put it in the back; you'd be shoved right up against the panel. Right?
Yeah.
So you just couldn't do it. So you seat packs. But the notion that even in combat, getting out is the problem. When you have to
exit
your stuff on, and then the parachute stuff on, and then you've got all this crap, and you got to get rid of the canopy and stand up in the seat, and maybe the airplane's doing this. It's having done it, it's mind-boggling. But if you have one chance, it's your chance.
Exactly.
And I still have an ironclad guarantee. If it doesn't open, bring it back. I'll pack it for free next time.
It's a hell of a guarantee.
Haven't had a customer yet. But anyways, that's what I've done, and I've loved aviation. I've flown people's aircraft up in Alaska quite a bit. I like outdoors, so I'm official in Alaska. So
okay.
I've gotten chances to fly beavers and land in volcanoes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Caldar also a volcano.
Yeah.
Once I was going mountain goat hunting, so the guy let me land and take off out of the volcano.
Yeah.
Like Flash Gordon.
You had to circle to get up, right?
Yeah, the problem was getting out, actually. Because the surface tension was getting to me. So I had to rough it up. Right? There's two ways to get the floats off the water. So it's calm.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
You have the surface tension. People don't know what that is.
Yeah. That was,
okay. And you can't get off. So you have to do one of two things. You either have, if you've got a stick for a flap, which a lot of the old ones do, you can do it very easily. You just hit this like that, and that pops you off. And then you fly 6 inches off the water.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that, you got electronic flaps. There's no pop
too low. Yeah.
So what you have to do there is you have to go around a couple of times, high-speed taxi, get the water choppy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that a percentage of your float is out of the water, and that's enough to break one of them loose.
Yeah.
And you break one loose, and the other one's easier to pull out. So that's what I had to do. And then you're flying right at the inside.
Yeah.
And then banking and going around like this. And up. It was quite an adventure.
Did you make it?
Yeah, I made it.
Good.
Yeah. Pretty cool. But those guys are brave guys up there.
Oh, yeah. Bush pilots.
But weather gets them all.
Yeah.
That Tweedo, he was another one. I remember flying Wild Alaska.
Yes.
He was a little Eskimo girl.
Yeah.
And her dad, Kim Tweedo.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was killed 2 years ago, I think. Weather.
Yeah.
It's the biggest problem. And I learned more about it than all my 50 years of flying through the mountains up back north in Alaska. When in doubt, don't go.
Yeah.
I just don't go because it gets you 1,500 feet per minute. One time I was going down, couldn't stop it.
Yeah.
And luckily, when I got down to the river, about 150 feet above the river, the air pillowed up. And I rode that pillow. Now what am I going to do? I'm not going to turn around and go back through that stuff. So you do it this way. And then you have to. The mountain flying is a whole different thing. I met Peacock or Pocock or whatever mountain. He does mountain flying classes. But when you learn that stuff, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
The
What?
tendency for an airplane to turn better to the left than the right means you hug this side of the mountain and not this side of the mountain. You never fly down the center because you don't have enough room to turn around.
Oh.
Okay, so that's a whole different thing.
Mhm.
But you learn that stuff, and you learn how to read stuff like glaciers. When you see the dust from the glacier,
Yeah.
okay, that's the winds coming down
Yeah.
the glacier. Very, very dicey.
Mm.
Get into one of those, especially when you guys fly above them.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah.
but when you're flying in them, it's
Yeah.
very dicey.
Yeah.
I waited 4 days because I wanted to compete at the contest, the short takeoff and landing contest in
Mhm.
Valdez.
Mhm.
So I was in Anchorage, so I flew up to Tourniquet Gap. You know where that is in
No.
Alaska? Well, it's a big arm of water that comes down.
Okay.
And at the head of that Tourniquet Gap, there's a glacier there, and it was spewing all sorts of crap. And when I got there, I waited for a week to go and now I'm running out of time. So I said, well, let's go. So we went up there, and then there's a little pass, and I have a photo of it. It's completely socked in. Little pass, the mountains like this.
Mm.
So I popped right through it. There's Whittier, Alaska, and the ocean down below me.
Mm.
So I went down. There's 6-foot swells, icebergs everywhere. So I couldn't land if I wanted to in the water.
Mm.
And I looked back, the hole's closed.
Oh no.
So I went back all the way to Valdez, and it's snowing, and the ceiling's getting lower and lower
Yeah.
and lower, and I'm going like this, and I get to a place called Potato Point, which is the entry to the harbor of Valdez. And the people who manufactured the airplane and Jeremy and his wife were there waiting for me because they wanted to go to this demonstration that we were going to do. Johnston and I were going to do at the Valdez Airshow. And I turned the corner, and there was like a Charlton Heston movie. The sun shone right down on the runway out of the back. And we landed. They were going to town at the time. They had already been briefed that no bush pilot was crazy enough to come in. And they actually saw the airplane. It was designed like, well, it was, the configuration of it was, it looked like a zebra. It was an African airplane. It was for rhino patrol. Anyways, so that's my experience with Alaska, and I've since flown many times up there. It's beautiful, but very dangerous place.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I flew in the mountains in a T-38 north of Edwards, with more power than God, in the engines, 30,000 feet per minute climb rate. So
trying 80 horsepower.
Yeah, I'm not going to do it. I mean, when I've flown in my 310 above the mountains, but I go mountains. I'm not going to mess with in a prop airplane.
Well, and not only that, but you got to figure the navigational aspect of it too.
Oh yeah.
No GPS, right? I can't do anything straight.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Blind canyons and that. It's kind of like
your GPS up the top is fine, but GPS down there, if you can get it. The only way I had sometimes was Pyrex, and cameras. Most of the major passes in Alaska have cameras in them.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So when you go to the little outposts, the FBOs, there'll be a government guy there or somebody there in the Yukon or British Columbia. There's a government and he'll show you pictures. So you have to decide whether you're going there.
Yeah.
So I just had a rough spell coming out of there one time, and I landed, and there was a young boy there with his girlfriend in his Satabria. And I think that was the one when I was going 1,500 feet down. Severe winds, very turbulent. And I landed, and we were getting fuel. And I walked over and chit-chatted with him, and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm taking my girlfriend up where it was." I said, "You're going through there?" Yeah. I said, "Son, take her to the hotel room." Okay. Don't do it. But that's the only thing you have.
Yeah.
And now you got to be willing to turn around, and if you get in a situation that's bad, you can't get out of it. There's no landing below. It's even the river's got rocks, rapids, and so anyways, it's quite an operation. But I've had a wonderful, interesting life.
Yeah, you have. Yeah.
I survived. But that was one little portion of it. So
thanks for sharing. This is cool. I like it.
There's probably a few more, but we'll wait till next.
A few beers and we'll tell stories that may even be true.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, thank you, Parker. I appreciate it. It was great. Thanks for doing my shoots.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hopefully, I'll never need them.
Yeah, if you do, and you see my dirty underwear, they screwed up.
Yeah,
Wrong bag.
wrong bag. All right, take care. Thanks a lot.